Professor Shelley Zedek.
Before I begin, I feel I would like to thank the organizing committee for this award and also for planning the conference, to Hila, to Peta, to Dov, to Miriam, to Avi, and to Mina. When I was notified of this award, I guess I was stunned, surprised, honored, and also very, very pleased to get this award. It is especially pleasing given that I'm getting it from my colleagues here in Israel. I have taught, I think the first year I taught here was at Hebrew University in 1976. It was a long time ago, as I was talking to some at the reception upstairs, before some were born. Then that winter I taught in Tel Aviv, so it was winter of 1977, and we've been back many, many times. My daughter spent a year here on a special program after college. She also spent her semester abroad. She came here 2 weeks before the first Gulf War and didn't want to return home when we got the call from Cornell that we could bring your daughter home. She didn't want to come home. One of the stories I'll take, and I hope I'm not taking too much time before my talk, is that to show you the relationships, and that's what this conference is all about, is one of my close friends, Miriam Erez, would go visit Cindy at the kibbutz where she was during the Gulf War, which at the time I thought was to check on how Cindy was doing. I found out later from Mia that she wanted to leave Haifa. And Tracy has spent some time here too, and Jason, my son-in-law, has only spent a brief time, but we hope to show him much more. So I've worked with a number of people here, I've published with people, etc., so they're colleagues. But it's especially pleasing to receive the award from the site of the many relationships that I've established here, my wife and I. The theme of this conference is relationships, and we have friends here, true friends, whether they're work friends. I'm looking at Hila because this afternoon I spoke about her paper on work friendship, and I did ask what's the difference between work friendship and neighborhood friendship or school friendship. We have true friendships here. We have shared our homes together. We've shared family events together. So it's especially meaningful to receive an award from my friends, my work friends, my neighborhood friends, my other friends from Israel. It's been a real pleasure. I want to acknowledge some of the friends for coming here tonight. Dalia Etzion and her late husband Shuker, very close friends. Mina Westman and Yitzchak, Dovaden and Neely, Mia Erez and Lipa, Simi Ronen and Freddie, who are not here tonight. I think they're due back into the country any day now. Amia Lieblich, who I don't think is sitting here, have all been friends as they spent time in Berkeley, and we've spent times with them here. These are my professional colleagues. I also have students from Israel, Moshe Krauss, who I don't believe is here. I've worked with Dov Elitzur, Ayala Pines, Yochi Cohn Farash is one of my students currently at Baruch. Dietze Caffrey was one of my first students at Berkeley, all Israelis. We have friends here, Ellen and Eldad sitting here. Ruthie Ackerman came from Berkeley to listen to this. So it shows what really is meaningful to me is to receive an award with friends. I also have a cousin here who I met for the first time tonight. She is the granddaughter of my cousin, Jessica, and my friend Adam. So an event like this is really especially meaningful to me where I could have friends. And as I look out, I should meet Margaret and Ben Schaefer, who we met in Hong Kong. She mentioned the travels we've done. So my wife and I have had the good fortune of traveling around the world. We just came back from our 7th continent. We visited Antarctica. So the bucket list is getting shorter. So again, thank you very much for this award, everyone. It's cherished, and I'm really pleased to have received it. So now I will, and I hope I didn't exclude anybody, Gilad, who I've worked with in the journal, so I can just go around the room, but I'll mess up on somebody's name sooner or later. So I'll stop there. So let me talk a little bit about research, and I'm going to talk about lawyers. Again, I know there's at least one lawyer sitting in the audience here. So if there are others, I'm talking about lawyers in the United States, okay? So that so I shouldn't be insulting anyone here. But I'm going to be describing a research project that began about 12 to 14 years ago with my colleague Marjorie Schultz, who's on the law faculty at Berkeley, also retired. And the kind of research that we've done for the 12 to 14 years. And it's going to be a different talk. For the last 3-4 years, I've given lots of talks to law groups, more so law groups than psychology groups. And there's a lot of interest now in the kind of research that we did. It came out first in 2008. It was picked up by various places, the New York Times, the Wall Street blog, etc. And then there was sort of a lull that there was very little interest. Within the last year, it's just mushroomed that if I had another 15, 20 years to give to my profession, I would be quite busy with this kind of research. The topic of lawyering and lawyers is critical because at least in the States, which might be in contrast to other countries like perhaps Israel, the pipeline, the entry into many important positions, whether it's in government or organizations, is to have a law degree. So what becomes very critical in the States is making sure you're picking the right people to be lawyers. So in about the year 1998 or so, the state of California, where I'm located, passed a resolution, not a resolution, a proposition saying that admission to law school cannot be based or cannot use anything like gender, race, ethnicity, or other factors for admission. What you had to use was purely academic criteria. To get into the law schools in the United States, you must take a test called the Law School Admission Test, the LSAT, for an abbreviation. Okay? It's very similar for other fields in the States. To get into the business school in the States, you take the GMAT, the General Management Aptitude Test. To get into college, you take the SAT, the Scholastic Aptitude Test. To get into medical school, you take a Medical College Aptitude Test. Remember, all these professional schools you go to after you finish 4 years of a bachelor's degree. So the test is a key indicator as to who will be admitted to schools. And what happens is the test becomes important for the university because the U.S. News and World Report is printed in Israel. You get it here. And you see the ratings of schools. For law schools, your rating as to how good of a law school you are is based in good part on the average LSAT score of your students. So the law schools always want to take the highest scores on the test. What this led to in the state of California when they said you had to rely on the LSAT, and there is another index which I'll mention in a second, it resulted in the admission of, let's say, African Americans, a very strong represented population in the States, of approximately maybe 5 to 7 candidates were admitted to law school in Berkeley, compared to prior to that when you had a much larger class in 300 admits, 350 admits, you had many more. So the law school got concerned as to what they can do. So they said, let's go talk to Zedek. He's supposed to specialize in admissions to organizations. Maybe he could help us. I had a good friend who was chairing the committee in the law school. He said, Shelley, come on over and talk to us. I went over and spoke to him. The next thing I know, it's 14 years later. I'm involved. He went off after 6 months. He's doing other things. So it just shows don't say yes always to committees. Okay? So what I'm going to talk about today is the research that we did, but Hila was concerned that this is a theme of relationships. And so what I'm going to do is focus on the relationships in lawyering and not give you lots of correlations and statistical results on the findings that we had. I will tell you the bottom line in conclusion that we had with respect to the results shortly, but I'm going to focus on relationships. Okay? So in starting the research, the LSAT in the States is administered by what's called the Law School Admission Council, LSAC. They write the test, they score the test, they publish all the preparation materials. It's a monopoly. They control the test, and they're the ones who do research on it. It's hard to do research if you're not part of the Law School Admission Council. We were fortunate enough to get some money from them at the beginning. At the end, when they saw the way things were going, they said, Zedek and Schultz don't know what they're doing, so we're cutting the funding off. The good news is we were able to get funding from private donors and from the dean at the law school at Berkeley. But the results from the Law School Admission Council, based on 165 law schools, shows that the first year law school, excuse me, here's a weighted composite. That's what I left out. What the law schools do is they say, we'll take your LSAT score, and we'll take your undergraduate grade point average and put them together in an index. Some schools say 50-50, some say 60-40, whatever. It doesn't make a difference. And that's what they look at. At Berkeley and at other places now, it's just looking at this rank listing of the index, the highest people are admitted, and that's it. They have data to show that the correlation is 0.5, 0.49, approximately 0.5. For those of you who know correlations in the world of employment literature, that's pretty good. Okay, it explains approximately 25% of the variance. But the question is, variance in what? And what the law school is able to show you is that the test explains variance in the first year law school grade point average. So your LSAT score, what you take as a junior or senior in college, along with the undergraduate grade point average, when you put them together, it explains how well you do after the first year of law school. After that, they have almost no data to show what it correlates with. Okay? But that's the basis for getting into law school. We'll forget this other stuff. The critical thing for us is to be test fair. From our legal definitions of what's test fair, test is considered fair for African Americans and other minorities, Hispanics. Okay? But if you rely on the composite, you'll get an underrepresentation of minorities, and that's what we were concerned about. Is there a way that we could find a better selection system that would result in a more diverse pool entering law school? And this is consistent with a lot of work that I've done throughout the 40-plus years that I've practiced with organizations and developing selection systems from major organizations, the Bank of America, Allstate insurance companies, Safeway supermarkets, to fire departments and police departments in various cities in the states. So it's sort of what I spent a good part of my career on, working with increasing the diversity of the workforces with gender and minorities. So one of the things we said, well, what other criteria are there that you can use against which to see whether the index works? And so there are other law school measures that you might look at, or maybe let's look at job performance, how you do as a lawyer. Okay. If you look at law school criteria, some people look at whether someone has a membership on a moot court, which is part of law school, if they're a member of the law review, if they participate in certain clubs, success on the bar exam. If you go to a place like Berkeley's law school, everyone passes the bar exam basically on the first try, so there's no variability. So these were not very good for us in the law school criteria, and besides, the Law School Admission Council really never looked at these as the contrast against which to evaluate the LSAT. So we asked some people, well, let's tell us about how you can measure the effectiveness, we started off, I'll tell you a little bit of a sidelight. We started off with, can you tell us how you can measure a successful lawyer? And a lot of them would talk about the salary, the number of clients, maybe publications, reputation, whether they're satisfied, whether they're a rainmaker. And sometimes when we said, can you tell us the success, how you know for success of a lawyer, they would say they made partnership in 5 years, or they have the big corner office with the windows that are adjacent to each other, or it's carpeted, okay? And they drive big cars. This is what the lawyers actually told us. So then we started to say, well, let's get away from the use of the word success and talk about effectiveness. So we repeated the question with effectiveness, and we got the same answers. They made partnership in 5 years, they had big cars, et cetera, et cetera. So at one point we said, well, look, there must be a better way to do this. So we said to the people who were asking questions, and I'll describe those people in a second, because mainly they were all lawyers. If you're a lawyer, if you needed a lawyer to defend you, think of that person. And when you think of that person, tell me why. And that changed their entire thinking. They didn't tell, well, he drives a big car. Or they said, because he or she can do this or can't do that. So we got into behaviors, and you'll see that's the essence of what we did as we went along in our research. Okay? So what we started at the outset was, can we figure out what defines an effective attorney? And so we used Berkeley law students. Bolt Hall is the name of the law school. 2L and 3L means second year and third year law school students. We use faculty. We ask faculty, what are you training these students to be? And the answer is academics, which is totally unrealistic. 5% of a class, if they're lucky, go into academics. Everyone else goes into practice so they can pay off the debt from law school. Okay? But the critical thing is we asked Bolt Hall alumni. These are practicing attorneys. We met with them. They were 2, 5, up to 20 years out, a random sample representative of type of firm and practice, et cetera, et cetera. We met with judges, district court judges in the states, clients. There were over about 2,000 participants in helping us to find effective lawyers, okay, in various stages. We spent about 1.5 years, 2 years doing this. Myself, my graduate students traveled to major centers in the States where we had a lot of alumni from Berkeley's law school. We had special meetings with them, lunches, and at these lunches, and we had to promise them there was a free lunch, so they came. Sometimes they had to leave early because they got a call to go defend a client or whatever, and we would ask them questions like, what I gave to you, if you had to choose a lawyer, think of that person and why. Okay? And so this is basically our job analysis sample. Judges were interesting to talk to, the clients were interesting, but mainly it was the Bolt Hall alumni. And as I said, there were at least 200, 250 that we personally interviewed, and then we had a questionnaire that did the rest. Okay. When we were finished with this 2 years, okay, we were able to identify 26 factors that are called effectiveness, that we call effectiveness factors. And we group these 26 factors into 8 larger categories. Now, for those of you who do statistics, we did not do a factor analysis of the data. We grouped them. The advisory board that I had with me on this project, some of you will know their names, Lieta Yu, who studies personality, Jim Oots, who studies a lot in employment discrimination, Paul Sackett, and several others. They were an advisory group, and they helped us group these effectiveness factors. And we came up with, as I said, 26. Now, 26 don't apply to every lawyer. Maybe 7 apply to a lawyer who practices criminal law. Maybe 8 apply to someone who does real estate, 2 of which might overlap with the first lawyer. But the 26 seem to cover the range of lawyering practice as performed in the states. And so what I'm going to do quickly, because I know time is running out and I tend to talk more than I'm usually allotted, I'm going to list the 26, and then I'm going to show you some more details that will relate to the theme of this conference. Okay? And what you'll notice is the ones that are in red are the ones that I'm going to come back to and talk some more. But if you look at things that we call intellectual and cognitive, it's analysis and reasoning. This is what the LSAT measures. The LSAT, Law School Admission Test, is a paragraph, and can you read the paragraph and understand what's in there? Okay, that's a big portion of it. Creativity and innovation, thinks outside the box. Okay, problem solving, identifies problems and comes up with solutions. Practical judgment, can take realistic approaches to problems. Researching the law, can you figure out what the law is about? Fact finding, questioning and interviewing, getting needed information from others. Influencing and advocating, persuading others of the position to win support. Writing, speaking, orally communicates. Listening, being a good listener is critical to being an effective attorney. Strategic planning, organizing and managing one's own work. Organizing and managing others, staff and colleagues. This was number 4. There are 8 of these, okay? Being able to negotiate makes you an effective attorney. Some people may call this empathy, the ability to see the world through the eyes of others. It's a little bit more than empathy, at least the way myself and my advisors looked at what empathy is, but it's able to understand the position, views, objectives, and goals of others. As a lawyer, you're usually dealing with a client who has a problem. The lawyer is the one driving the big car. So can you identify with that individual, see their perspective, etc.? Okay. So, client and business relations, entrepreneurship, networking, and business development. providing advice and counseling, and building relationships with clients. Developing relationships within the legal profession. Lawyers need to evaluate, develop, and mentor others. The last category is my hodgepodge. It's the more psychological category. Does a lawyer have passion and engagement? And you might be interested in knowing, well, what does a lawyer mean when they talk about passion? Okay? For some, that is an inconsistency between passion and practicing law. Okay. But what they meant is this person's really interested in law, that even when the case is over, they're still studying the issues related, trying to understand it better, Diligence. Okay. Integrity and honesty turned out to be a poor choice of terms for our study. Okay. Stress management. Okay. Community involvement and service. And self-development. So I've just gone through the 26 then factors that we had come up with, and I'm just losing my place here. Okay. And what we then did is when we were developing these 26, or identifying these, at the same time we were developing these 26, we sat in these rooms, these conference rooms, with the attorneys, and we asked them for specific behaviors to represent each of these 26 factors. For those of you who may have followed some of my research, years ago I worked on behaviorally anchored rating scales. And this is exactly what we did this time. So we sat in the conference room, myself, the graduate students, with flip charts, and we wrote down examples that illustrated very effective, none of these, or maybe very effective community service and involvement. They also gave us examples of very ineffective community involvement and service, and they also gave us examples of something in the middle. So what we were trying to do is to generate a scale of behaviors that could illustrate and define these things in much greater detail than I can, using lawyers' terminology, lawyers' language, and lawyers' behaviors. And what we were able to generate in these sessions was the 26 effectiveness factors, along with over 700 examples of lawyering practice effectiveness at different levels, from very effective down to very ineffective. And so what we then did with all these 700 examples is go back to a population of lawyers, again, both alumni, and said we couldn't give 700 to a single lawyer. We'd never get any cooperation. We gave a lawyer 40 examples, cutting across the 26 factors. And for each one, they had to identify the level of effectiveness of the particular example. And so we have averages and standard deviations for all 700 examples that we got. And now we're able to say that here's an example that a group of lawyers agrees represents very effective negotiations. Here's an example that represents very ineffective negotiations. So we have over 700 of these examples. What we did with these examples is to get ready for stage 2. Stage 1 was to figure out, if you're going to do a selection study, and that's what we really were interested in doing, the first thing is to figure out what are you trying to predict. So we spent a couple of years figuring out how to predict what's an effective lawyer. The next stage, stage 2, would be what tests can we develop or use that might predict these effectiveness factors. So we used the 700 examples and the 26 effectiveness factors to create a behaviorally anchored rating scale for each effectiveness factor. Okay? So you're not going to be able to read this, it's an eye test, but this is what it sort of looks like. Okay? So up here is an example of a very effective analysis and reasoning behavior. Here's one that's very poor. It's irrelevant for the purposes of this talk. But we have scales like this that exist for all 26 factors. And the goal was to take this scale, give it to a lawyer to evaluate another lawyer. So if I'm evaluating Avi as a lawyer, how does Avi fit on this scale? Is he close to 5, 3, or 1? And basically, I would be asking myself, would I expect Avi to do something like this? Or would I expect him to do something like this? So usually you start at the bottom and work up. Avi wouldn't do this. This is bad. This is bad. Avi wouldn't do this. He would do this. He would do this. I don't think Avi would do this. I'm going to give Avi about a 4. So these scales became our criteria to be used in the next stage of the study. Now at this point when I give these talks, I get into all the statistical data that we have on this stuff. But what I'm going to do is sort of give you a little bit of that in a little while. What I'm going to do instead is go through some of these again quickly. We light the candle at 8:30? Okay. Okay. Just go through them and show you some of the examples that we got. Because out of the 26, as I went through them in preparation for this talk, 18 out of the 26, or more than 70% of the effectiveness factors, involve something that deals with relationships. Okay, so I'm meeting the theme of the conference. Okay, the kinds of things that are stressed in the behaviors involve relationships. So for creativity and innovation, coming up with solutions that appeal to emotion. You know, you can read them for yourself. It doesn't pay for me to read them. Okay, identifies the person whose personality characteristics would best enable his or her clients to get a good settlement. So you're trying to figure out things about other people, which is a function of your relationships. In problem solving, understands the speaker's reasons and intentions. So you have to understand the speaker and know something about the speaker. Addresses other specific points and goals. Again, it involves something with relationships. This is a negative one. Loses sight of the larger relationship his or her client has with the other party. So I'm only reading the red parts. So you can skim these. I don't want to stand up here reading all of these to you. But in the 26, 18 of them can have something to do with relationships. Practical judgment, assesses people accurately, and makes good predictions about them. Is very aggressive in dealing with opposing counsel, even when aggressiveness is counterproductive. So you recognize your behavior with others as counterproductive, but you continue to behave in that particular way. A negative behavior. Questioning and interviewing. Makes the interviewee feel comfortable and interested in answering. Demonstrates that the client understands more about the situation than he or she initially believed. All relationships. Influencing and advocating, persuading someone. Find out the individual's underlying concern. Show the person how he or she is covered another way so that she'll be more comfortable giving up that point. All dealing with relationships. So this will be on some website, so I'm going to skip some of these. Speaking, listening has something. So now you've seen the 26. Speaking, listening, organizing and managing your own work, organizing and managing others, negotiation skills. This would be a negative one, without taking into account the emotions involved in a dispute. Able to see the world through the eyes of others. Thinking about how arguments can be made more palatable to the people who will be asked to accept it. Networking is a sort of an obvious one that involves relationships. Providing advice and counsel and building relationships with clients is an obvious relationship effectiveness factor. Developing relationships is obvious. Evaluation, developing, and mentoring involves relationships with people. Integrity and honesty. We'll skip this one. This one didn't work very well. Stress management. Community involvement and service. Those are the 18 out of the 26 where you can find something to deal with relationships. So that's what's sort of unique for this presentation that I usually don't do when I'm talking to lawyers or to academics who want to know what to do with all this stuff. So we have ways of measuring performance, and now what we needed to do is to figure out alternatives to the LSAT that we could use. And here we rely on the literature where certain tests have been shown to be predictive of work performance and also have a lower difference between Caucasians and minorities, because the LSAT has about a 1 standard deviation difference, and that's why they don't come out on the top of the scale. Okay? So the potential new predictors that we tried are personality, including Snyder's self-monitoring scale, Carver's optimism scale. We tried emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is not the way it's typically done. If you're familiar with Paul Ekman's research on emotions, where he has studied people's muscles in their faces and can detect all sorts of emotions just by looking at their faces. We used his device to try and measure who could identify, recognize emotions. We use biographical inventory, biographical data, things about people's experiences, etc. We used an accomplishment record, which I won't talk about tonight. That was basically yet a you. We use situational judgment tests. We made up tests that I presented problems to people and asked them how they would solve it. Okay? We tried for moral responsibility. A test is one in the University of Minnesota. It's on their website. It's the REST test of moral responsibility to see if we can measure integrity and honesty in lawyering effectiveness. Okay. The personality test, most of you should be familiar with the big five. These are the ones that are typically studied when you give a personality test. We also used a test on personality, motives, values, and interests. By the way, the tests that we used are basically Joyce Hogan and Robert Hogan's tests. They helped us with the website to administer all these tests to our participants. So the motives, values, and interests, how they fit to an organization's culture. We also used a test that Hogan has developed for potential for derailment. The Hogans have studied managers who have failed, and they identified factors that cause failure in managerial situations. So we were looking for negative correlations. So there are definitions for these, which, again, I'm not going to go over here. Okay. So now we went to the study. We developed all these tests. What Schultz and I and our students developed personally was a situational judgment test. We created over 100 situations. And what we did is we spent over a year sitting down in a room, taking each effectiveness factor and saying what kind of situations could we write that might be used to measure effectiveness on that factor. And we did the same thing for biographical inventory. So we developed 100 of these items for both biographical inventory and for situational judgment, both of which have a good history in the employment literature of being predictive of performance in different jobs, and with minimal, or technical term, minimum adverse effect against minorities. Okay. So we decided to administer those tests to Berkeley alumni, people who've gone to law school at Berkeley, and again, we had them from 2 years out to 30 years out. So lawyers who had been practicing for 30 years agreed to take not all the tests we had, but we gave them subsamples. So someone may have taken the personality test and situational judgment, someone else took the personality test and biographical inventory, someone took the emotion recognition test, etc. So we varied it around because we couldn't take a day's time from the practicing attorneys. So they took the tests. The critical thing here was when they finished the test, and it was all done web-based. When they finished the test, we said, okay, oh, by the way, these are all alumni, and one of the ways we got them to participate, we had over 1,100 attorneys take these tests, which is a lot. One of the ways we got them to participate is they all took the personality tests, and Hogan gave them feedback as to their profile, what their personalities are like. Okay, which was kind of interesting. They enjoyed that, except for those who would see me at social gatherings and said, I'm not like that at all. So I said, I didn't write it, okay? The other thing, the best one I ever got was, I'm not like that when I practice law, but this is the way I am at home. So we gave them personality feedback. They liked that and they participated. But the critical thing we asked them when they finished was, would I like you to take these 26 effectiveness factors, the scales, evaluate yourself on the subset of factors that you think are relevant to your practice. Okay? So that's not difficult. They can do a self-evaluation. We then said, I'd like you to identify 2 supervisors, 2 people above you in your current practice who could evaluate you, and give us permission to contact them with the set of 26 factors that they could fill out about you. Also give us 2 names of people who work with you who can give us peer evaluations on the subset of 26 factors. So I'll pick on Avi. Avi does himself, He then identifies 2 supervisors and 2 peers. Okay? Supervisor 1 evaluates Avi on factors 1, 9, and 22. Supervisor 2 may choose different factors. It didn't make a difference, and you didn't have to do all 26. So sort of as a little quiz here, if I have 1,100 participants doing a self-evaluation, 2 peer, and 2 supervisor, how many evaluations can you get? Maximum. Who's paying attention? Who's awake? 1,100 times 5. I'll answer it for you. You're all stunned. Okay. You can get 5,500 evaluations. So what would you think? Now, here, I'm not going to give you the answer right away. What would you expect to be a reasonable response? How many evaluations do you think we would get? Let me pick on some of the mathematical psychologists. Go on. How many? 47%? 43%? That would be good. Okay. Anybody else? Another number going once, twice, 3. Okay. We use Bolt, and now we went to another law school that's in the university system called Hastings. The current students took the test, but I'm not going to talk about their students today, only those who are practicing. They identified the appraiser, self-supervisor, and peer. We got over 4,000 evaluations. This is the most impressive part of the research, not the results. The fact that 4,000 people agreed to evaluate the 1,100 lawyers. And those 4,000 are not alumni necessarily of Bolt. So they had no allegiance to help us out. They could have been Stanford or Chicago or some other law school. But we got over 4,000 evaluations, which I thought was shocking to all of us. So we got these results. We also were able to collect the LSAT score from each of the 1,100 participants that were either in a computer file or on paper in some basement on the Berkeley campus. We also got their undergraduate grade point average when they applied to law school. We had that in the files. So we had undergraduate grade point average, we had the law school, the LSAT tests, we were able to convert it to an index, and then we had scores on all the tests that we had developed. Okay? And now we were going to correlate it for our sample to see how well the LSAT and the index correlated with their first year GPA, which we had, because they were all Berkeley alumni, files were there, as well as the effectiveness factors of practicing law. So the LSAT and the first year grade point average for our sample correlated 0.42. In that larger sample was 0.49. These are all uncorrected correlations. The undergraduate and first year grade point average correlated 0.21. The index in the first year grade point average correlated 0.42. This is the one that's close to what LSAC had found for 165 schools. So in some ways we replicated what LSAC had, so Berkeley is very similar to what the rest of the United States looks like in terms of the LSAT as a predictor of performance. The new tests that we had did not do better than these things at predicting law school performance as measured by first year grade point average. So personality doesn't predict first year grade point average. A situational judgment doesn't predict first year grade point average. Mentioned personality, biodata doesn't predict first year grade point average. But it's no surprise because the first year grade point average is based on taking tests that you understood the law that you were reading about in the first year. Because that's what they train you in the first year. Now, speaking of training, in our interviews, we asked all the lawyers, what did you learn in law school? And most of them said bookwork. How did you learn how to be a lawyer? When we became lawyers. You don't learn how to be a lawyer. If you go to the law school in the United States, you don't learn how to practice law in law school. You get that in your summer internships or afterwards. So our tests don't do better than the LSAT. Okay. And now if you look at our tests, excuse me more. The LSAT predicted 12 of the 26 performance dimensions. 8 are negative. The better you do in the LSAT, the worse you do in one aspect of performance as a lawyer. Okay. Same thing for the index. 4 were negative and only 9 were predicted. So again, the LSAT does not predict very well how you function as an attorney. I'm going to skip. This is some of the index and writing, 0.16. You can see the correlations that we did get that was significant were 0.16, 0.18, 0.14 in the teens. Situational judgment, if you average across the 26 dimensions, you get a 0.25, higher than those. And that's the average across the 26. If you look at individual relationships between situational judgment and the individual factors, 24 out of 26 are predicted by situational judgment. The same thing for biodata. Correlation is 0.38, okay, in a very restricted sample. These are all practicing attorneys who graduated from Volz Law School. So it's a very restricted sample. So my emotion recognition test, which was the one I thought was the best test ever, just didn't work. And I have some reasons why. When someone replicates this, hopefully they do it. The HPI is personality, things like ambition, agreeableness, correlate. From the Hogan developmental sample, which is the one about derailment, you can get excitable. From the motives, altruistic, you can get some significant correlation. With all the personality tests, the optimism correlates very well with a whole host of the 26 factors. So what we were able to demonstrate is that our tests could predict in a concurrent strategy effectiveness and performance of lawyers, whereas the LSAT cannot, which causes a great problem for the LSAC in terms of what to do since they control the LSAT. Okay. So what does all of this mean? Okay. One thing that my concern for going into this was because I was concerned about admissions and increasing diversity. By the way, on all those tests that I just mentioned, situational judgment and personality and biodata, the difference between, let's say, African Americans and Caucasians is very small to non-existent. Sometimes the African Americans are a little higher, sometimes they're a little lower at some of these things, but very trivial differences. So if you relied on our test for admission, you'd get a more diverse student body, which means a more diverse pipeline going into government, to organizations where they assume positions of leadership. I am not, and LSAC understands this, I'm not saying to do away with the LSAT. You have to be able to read and do analysis. I have a strategy for them that is to administer the LSAT, use a particular score. All these people above the score are okay, and then choose from within them based on what we came up with. When this came out in 2008, the LSAC said, great results, okay? And what we wanted them to do was to replicate this across the United States, because you wouldn't rely on Berkeley for changing anything, okay? They initially agreed, but then they've changed their minds, and they're out of the picture totally. Since then, the implications are we have been contacted by a whole host of law schools for our information to change the design and curriculum in law school. Because the evidence we had is you don't learn how to be a lawyer in law school. More and more law schools in the States now are introducing clinical courses taught by non-faculty. They're adjuncts. They're the ones who are practicing in the field and setting up clinics where you can get some first-hand experience at taking a deposition, at questioning a client or whatever. I'll skip the internship. There is thought of using our performance factors for evaluation in law school for graduation. So just don't rely on the grade point average that they get from taking these book tests, but put them through certain kinds of practices. I have the bar exam. The bar exam. In one of my talks to Supreme Court justices in different states, the Supreme Court justice in each state controls the bar exam for that state. And the bar exam differs from state to state to state, except for one national part. There's a university in the northeast of the United States which is using our factors to create a, I think it's a 6-week, or I might be 6 months, my memory is not as good as it used to be, program after law school to put them through actual practice of law and then to evaluate them using part of our factors to see if in fact they will pass the bar. So you don't pass the bar there until you actually practice some law. In most other schools, you graduate from law school in June. In July, you go to a private independent company like Kaplan, and they teach you how to pass the bar exam. And then you take the bar exam, then you get into the law firm, and then you can practice law. So they're changing it. The profession of law in the States has changed in the last few years. It's no longer the most lucrative profession you can go into. In part, it's a function of the economy, but also it's in part of resistance by organizations willing to pay high salaries or high fees to law firms. So the law profession is changing in the States. And recently, my colleague and I met with about 65 different attorneys supported by the bar exam in the state of California to describe our results, to see how it can be used. And a lot of them want to use our test to decide who to hire into the firm after they've graduated from law school. And so what has come out of that is sort of, I think, an interesting concept that we will be exploring in the very near future, is to convince law schools to administer our test to when you finish your second year of law school, your third year of law school. And when you go out to apply for a job in a law firm, the information on our tests are sent along to the law firm. Because right now what the law firm wants to know basically is, what was your rank in law school class? That's how they hire you. When I was interviewing these lawyers who were in their second or third job, I said, when you took your second job, what were the main questions that they asked you to hire you in your second job? The obvious thing would have been, how did you do in the first job? And what they asked is, what law school did you go to? If you've gone to Harvard, to Chicago, to Berkeley, to Stanford, you write your own ticket. They call them, it's a very elite profession. Elitist. You're in a top tier school, and you can get any job you want. And it doesn't make a difference if you screw up or not in the first job. The second job is, where did you get your degree? Berkeley, wonderful, you'll get the job. Go to another school, you don't necessarily get the job. So they're looking now to get more information in terms of hiring to become a problem for them. Okay. Some of our information is being used for determining training. Remember I have those 700 examples? You can give those 700 examples to lawyers coming into your firm, and they can read them at their leisure and learn what's good practice and bad practice. I know we have a nurse here. I did this for nursing years ago, for operating room nurses. And we gave the nurses the booklet, and it described what's effective nursing and what's ineffective nursing. So it's a training device. So we're getting interested in that. Evaluating lawyers for partnership. There are law firms who would like to use some of our tests. I'm not so sure about that, the test, but they could use the effectiveness factors to evaluate people and make decisions on whether they should be partners or receive raises, and then feedback to lawyers. So what is happening right now is, as I said, there was a lull from 2008 when the study was first published. It's now in actual print, not in a psychology journal, but in Law and Social Inquiry. There will be an article coming out about this in Educational Psychologist within the next 6 months to a year, that doesn't provide the data. The data that I've described and not described is pretty much in here. You could go to the 2008 report that's on the Berkeley website, and you can get more of the data if that's what you like. But now there's a lot of interest in this for all those reasons that I mentioned, except for admissions and diversity. Law firms want to use the data for hiring, for evaluating people, etc., for changing schools are changing curriculum. The admissions is still an issue. So as far as admissions go, I'll be finished almost on time. We are not unique in studying lawyers. The medical college admission test, which is administered to, I think, third year or fourth year bachelor students as to whether they go to medical school in the States, has now decided that they will have they're going to try a different test besides the medical college admissions test, which is basically your biology, anatomy, etc. And they're going to start studying personal relationships and personality. Can you deal with people? It's sort of an awareness that a doctor talks to people. Okay? So they're going to that. The graduate school, business schools in the States are looking at situational judgment now, in addition to the GMAT. The SATs, which gets you into an undergraduate school in the States, has now through the impetus of the University of California, now requires all applicants, besides taking the SAT, numerical and verbal, you have to deal with a writing component. We want to see if kids coming into college can write. So they are changing a lot of these things because they're finding that the typical tests don't explain much variance that's useful. So we are not alone. The thing that we're going to try and do, and I can't mention the names yet because it's not firm, there are 5 law schools that I will be meeting with in March to discuss using our tests on a volunteer basis. So students who apply, they'll submit their LSAT, they'll submit their undergraduate grade point average, and then they have the choice of taking our tests. If they take our tests, the law school will assure them that they will look at those results, and if they like them, use it. So if you're a low LSAT, relatively, not low, but if you're not at the very top, which is automatically going to keep you out of the top tier school, you have a chance by providing different data that you might get into a top tier law school. So there's lots of implications for this, and as I said, there's a lot of interest in this. I know there's some young people like Gilad. If he wants to have the data set, I can give it to him, and he can do this for the next 15 years. But it's been a real experience working with the lawyers in the States, and I must say, I usually say this at the beginning, I don't make too many jokes or criticize lawyers too much because my son is a lawyer. Okay? So, the one who's not here today is practicing law. Okay? So again, thank you very much for the award and for your attention. Thank you.